It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Atul Butte. He's our keynote speaker. Atul is a founder. He's a scientist, an engineer, and innovator. He's got multiple exits. He's the Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg Distinguished Professor and Inaugural Director of the Baker Computational Health Sciences Institute. He's going to talk about a lot of things today, but he's going to talk about data. He's going to get us inspired, and it's such an honor to have him here. Atul.
That works. Thanks for having me. I get you for the next 30 or 40 minutes here, and it's a real thrill to be up here. First, I'm a medical doctor, and I represent a provider network, the University of California. I'll explain what that is in a moment. But since I'm a medical doctor, I got to start with my conflicts of interest. I have just a few. Actually, I have a bunch. On the top left are the companies I've started. I'll talk about those. I consult for almost every major pharma and biotech. So I wouldn't blame me if you didn't believe another word I said over the next 40 minutes. But I am most proud of the right side of the slide. Those are all the companies started by my students. More than half my grad students now start companies, even if they go into academia, and they do it with the most amazing platform in the world. And it's simply data. It's often big data. It's sometimes open big data. I'm going to show you how they did it. I'm going to show you how I did it. And maybe I'll convince you, despite all the bad news, this is still the most amazing time to be in innovation and entrepreneurship. So with that, we're going to be definitely talking about data. You know, you cannot pick up any major magazine now and see a cover like this, okay? Where there's data, and it's big data. It might be small data. It's open data. It's AI and machine learning. In fact, The Economist covers it again and again, right? You see two covers down there, the data deluge. And then on the bottom right there, data is the world's most valuable resource. Now, there's something interesting about that cover because they're equating it to oil rigs, right? Do you see that? And that to me is very concerning because we hear that all the time, right? Data is the new oil, right? Maybe you've heard that. I hate that saying because when you think about oil, you think about barrels of oil. And either I have that barrel of oil or you have that barrel of oil. We cannot both have the same barrel of oil. Data is completely different. I might take a data set and make a diagnostic with it. You might take a data set and figure out a therapeutic from it, right? We can have the same data and create many different things. And so I think that's the point about data. It's divisible and doesn't lose any intrinsic value. Now, of course, we have data and huge data sets in biomedicine as well. Here are just some of the logos of all the different sources of data. Of course, you see Epic there as an EHR. We'll talk a lot about that. But you see major cohorts, the UK Biobank studying 500,000 individuals, the All of Us research program studying 1 million individuals in the United States, and many, many other data sets. I'm going to start the talk with just 3 simple slides, how I use this data to actually create some value, create some companies here. The first of these is a company called Numeti. So what we realize is so many people, right, because of NIH mandates and the Gates Foundation and many other funders, if you create a data set as a scientist now, you have to give that away on the internet. What we realize is so many people were giving out data sets on diseases, and so many people were giving out data sets on drugs, that we could just put these two together. Maybe this drug might work for this disease, right? Put these two disparate data sets together. And you know, you turn this crank, you get a lot of ideas. This drug could work and that drug could work, but where the fun ones were new uses for old drugs, right? Drug repositioning. As we turn that crank quite a bit, and I'm really proud of Numeti, raised now close to $10 million, because of course you cannot keep these in your lab, you got to start these companies, now focusing on idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a nasty condition that has 2 drugs, neither of which are that great for patients. So that's an example. And I tell my lab all the time, if you want to change the world, you can't just keep writing papers about it. The science continues in the startup companies. Another example is Carmenta. We wanted to come up with a new diagnostic for an incredibly nasty condition called preeclampsia, when blood pressure goes shooting high in pregnant women. It leads to lots of mortality and morbidity all across the world, every socioeconomic status, every race and ethnicity. But we realized so many people were studying preeclampsia with all these molecular tools. Why don't we just go download all their data sets, they give them away, and figure out what's in common. I don't care if that researcher saw something or that researcher saw something. I'm going to chase down what every researcher saw. And let's figure out how to make a serum blood test, a blood test for preeclampsia. Because right now, the test that we use is one of the most non-specific tests we have. Urine protein, not even a specific one. So we turned our crank and we came up with some diagnostics in the middle. And what did we do in Silicon Valley? We launched a company called Carmenta, raised $2 million in seed financing. Now, look, I'm not going to brag about $2 million. As you know, in Silicon Valley, that's not a lot of money to raise. But at the bottom right there, you can see what happened next. The company was already acquired. So we went from downloading data to selling the company in 18 months, right? Inventors happy, investors happy, universities happy, and I'm giving away the secrets here, right? All of these links work, they tell you the story. Because every one of you could come up with a new diagnostic for a different disease. We'd never step on each other's toes. We need that many diagnostics in medicine today, right? That's the story of Carmenta acquired by Progenity. But boy, the next story, the third story, is even more amazing to me, where what we realized in 2008 was someday a patient's going to show up in our medical system with a genome, right? One of these DNA sequences. And we were so not ready for that. And this one really started with a high school kid in San Jose, where we said, you know what, there's no master list of all the spots in the DNA and all the diseases they've been associated with. Let's just start making a list. And a really smart San Jose high school kid could read 50 papers in a summer and curate them, right? Read them and figure out this SNP and this spot in the DNA meant this disease and this odds ratio. And we said, if a smart kid can do this 50 papers in a summer, let's just go read every single paper in genetics. And we hired a massive team in India to just read every single paper in genetics. And we made the master list of just every single spot in the DNA, every single disease and odds ratio and p-value. Turn that crank. What do you do in Silicon Valley? You launch a company. Now this became Personalis. And in 2019, they IPO'd, we IPO'd, and at the peak, of course everything's down from the peak, we reached a $2 billion market cap. And this started with a San Jose high school kid who was reading papers to build a curation, right? Just to build that database. Nothing I just showed you in these three companies needs magic computers. In fact, we don't even have the computers anymore. We rent them from Amazon, right? Amazon Cloud, right? The data is out there, the papers are out there. It's just up to you to realize this is coming. What can I do about it now to address that need in 3 to 4 to 5 years? And that's no different today, no different today. Now, let's think about those, but then let's focus on, to me, the next big data. Electronic health records. EHRs are so old, they're new again, okay? Because everyone has them. Here are 3 press releases illustrating how much money we spend on electronic health records. Sutter is a health system in California, our neighbors here, up and down California, spent $1 billion on their EHR system. You see that in the back there. Partners, which is Mass General and Brigham and Women's Hospital, spent $1.2 billion on their EHR system. And Kaiser Permanente spent $4 billion on their EHR system. Now, amazingly, they all bought the same system, Epic. Okay? And the price tag goes between $1 billion and $4 billion. Now, it's not just for the software. It's for training and training the trainers and all these trips to Verona, Wisconsin, and all the badges and certificates you get, and redesigning workflow. But boy, the narrative I want to communicate here is this is now the most expensive data in America. We're paying doctors to type all of this in. And really, the take-home point is it will be a national tragedy given how many billions we've spent here, if we don't use this data to improve the practice of medicine. Of course, we have to do this safely, responsibly, respectfully, but boy, what a tragedy it will be if we don't use this to improve the practice of medicine. And that's what we're talking about here. Now with that, let me just reintroduce where I come from. I represent the University of California, right? You're surrounded by UC campuses here. You might have passed UC Irvine on your way from the airport. University of California is massive. We have 10 campuses, 3 national labs, including Lawrence Livermore, which I think has the number 2 or number 3 supercomputer in the country, if not the world. We have 200,000 employees who are one of the larger employers of the United States, 250,000 students per year, and we have 6 medical schools, and thus 6 academic health centers. That's UCSF, UCLA, Irvine, Davis, San Diego, and Riverside. We have 14 other health professional schools, nursing, pharmacy, dental, veterinary, public health. We train half the medical students and residents in California. We get about 10% of the NIH extramural budget, and coincidentally, we write 10% of all scientific papers in the United States, all scientific productivity, whether it's ecology to the economy, 10% of all papers written by the University of California. It's about 13 to 14 billion in clinical operating revenue, so I think that places us now at number 8 in the country in terms of revenue for health systems, number 8 size. 5,000 doctors get a paycheck from us every month, but 100,000 doctors write orders on our patients every year. It's all the residents, all the fellows. And USCSF and UCLA are in the US News top 10. And that one's an interesting one because everyone else is leaving that list. So we're moving up no matter what we do. Until we decide to leave that list, we're still in there. So all of a sudden we're getting better. No fault of our own. And we have 5 NCI comprehensive cancer centers and 5 NIH clinical translational science awards to take from discoveries to products. And then we got these secret superpowers that are so secret even we forget we have them. IRB reliance, right? If one of our medical schools approves an IRB, the other 5 auto-magically approve them too, okay? Now what that really means, instead of weeks to months, it might take days to weeks, right? But once one IRB approves it, then we can rely on that one. And centralized contracting, which some of you might know, if the University of California Office of the President signs a contract, the other campuses will agree, no renegotiation needed. What an amazing partner to help you scale, right? Because we can just scale like crazy. We have friends on every campus here. And what we now have is this umbrella across the health enterprise called University of California Health, UC Health. That's what I'll be explaining. Now, UC Health really was started more than 10 years ago, but really came out of, in my view, stealth mode in 2016 because we announced this declaration that we want to build a single accountable care organization for the University of California. Now, this may happen someday, 5 to 10 to 15 years ago, and we partner with United Healthcare to learn how to take on risk, right? If you don't learn how to do this, you lose money in a hurry. But the idea is we're going to have to build, we want to build a single accountable care organization for the University of California. Now, the first thing is, when you make a decision like that, you got to ask yourself, well, UCSF does it this way, and UCLA does it that way. Which is the right way we're going to take care of liver cancer, transplants, even pneumonia, right, or diabetes? And all of a sudden you realize we got to figure out the right UC way to take care of everything. Boy, it's a lot easier to figure that out when you have a central database of all the clinical data in one place. And that's what we ended up building, and that's what I'll be talking about here. So I wouldn't be an IT guy if I didn't know how to make boxes point to boxes on PowerPoint, so here's the slide that does that. And here you can see the logos at the bottom. So UCSF and UCLA are the 2 kind of big gorillas there. Irvine and Davis are smaller, San Diego's in the middle, and Riverside's our baby sibling, all right? They're a brand new medical school. They don't have a hospital system yet. They have some clinics there, but I'm going to show them just like the rest. And so each of these 6 has their own data warehouse, same common data model, and every month, every 2 to 4 weeks, all that data moves centrally. Now, we were happy with every 2 to 4 weeks until COVID hit. And during COVID, we moved all that data nightly. Every single night was going into the central database here, right? Central database. So what does that mean? Okay, so this is a little bit of a busy slide here, but these are what the latest numbers look like. We're just coming up on 9 million patients now that we've treated over the last 11 years. And this is literally every dose of every drug, every vital sign, every pain score, every respiratory rate for 9 million patients. You can see some of the finer details there. 378 million encounters, 1 billion procedures, 1.3 billion medications we've ordered or prescribed. Relevant to this audience, 44 million medical devices we've used. I'll give you some more details in a moment. 1.4 million providers over 11 years, 1.1 billion diagnosis codes, and 5.2 billion lab tests or vital signs. Another way I like to explain it is we have everything from Tylenol to CAR T cells. Tylenol is probably the cheapest thing we can offer to a patient, right? Tablet of Tylenol, we'll still charge quite a bit for that, but that's probably the cheapest thing we can do. 2 CAR T cells, well, we'll take out your white blood cells, train them to fight cancer, and put them back in, right, to fight that cancer for you. That's probably the most expensive thing we do, and we have everything in between, right? So we're not just primary care, we're not just tertiary quaternary care. About 800,000 or more of these patients are primary care that we follow. It's merged with state regulatory data, pathology, radiology, text. We conveniently run the death index for the state of California, so we know everyone who dies in the state of California merged with our database. And all of this is safe, respected, regulated, responsible use of clinical data. Now, let me just give you some examples. If you just took the potassium measurement, you know we get serum or plasma potassium measurements. Here's 24 million of them, okay? 24 million serum potassium measurements. Luckily, most are on 4 or 5 or 6. There's some near 0 and some near 10. Those are not so good for human life. Hopefully we did something about it, and we can tell if we did something about it, right? Because we have all the medical records there. Now, that's a kind of easier one. A harder one is this one. Almost 1.4 million BI-RAD scores. right? Now this comes from the mammogram that we do that generates a text report that we parse out every birads, every ejection fraction from every echo, every mammogram across the entire University of California, right? So here's 1.4 million BI-RADS scores looking, these are for breast cancer screening, for example, right? When we need to get to the text, we can parse out all of those numbers from the text too. So I'm gonna argue probably there is nowhere else in the United States where 6 academic health centers bulk data share like we do constantly, like we do in the University of California. And I'll make it relevant for you, medical device folks. I looked in the hotel room. We have the Edwards Sapiens valve, for example, we've used 1,544 times. The Zimmer personalized knee, which is super expensive, I will tell you. I'm not sure why, I'm not a surgeon, I'm technically a pediatrician. We use 56 times, but here's where it gets fun. The Zimmer 75 millimeter by 3.2 millimeter tracer tip drill pack, we use 418 times. We track every screw of every kit for every device because you have to still order it in Epic. And boy, are we great at billing for those things. And all of that data is sitting there, waiting for some interesting scientific questions. The Medtronic Bovi pad, I think that's for grounding, right? 130,615 times. The Ethicon Proximate stapler, we've used 59,629 times. We track 119,000 individual device elements, okay, in Epic across the whole UC Health system. Probably your devices are in our system or wanna be in our system, right? But if you've already gotten them approved, chances are we're using it somewhere and we actually know if it's working or not. And all of that data is just sitting there. What can we do with that together? So this is what it looks like. Of course, this starts as an identifiable database, right? We have every zip code, every address, right? We're using this for quality improvement. So here are about the 7.6 million patients in California. Northern California is UCSF and UC Davis. Southern California is UC Irvine, UCLA, UC San Diego, and there's a tiny little dot for UC Riverside. You see age, race, gender, ethnicity, of course, that's common, primary care, not primary care. But because we can geocode every single patient, we know the characteristics of where they live, the tip of the top of social determinants of health. The social vulnerability index, for example, is this a rural area without a lot of resources, an urban area with a lot of resources, is an urban area with few resources, right? We have all of those kinds of elements that we can track. Now, I'm not saying we've solved social determinants of health, but it's actually the first step there. We can do all of that there. Now, first thing, before I go into detail on what we do with all this data, I want to point out we give all of this data to patients, okay? Every good health system should do this. Now, if you really want to learn how to do this, if you go see a doctor regularly, if you have an iPhone, you should just click on that little heart icon. You thought it was tracking your steps and sleep. It actually has a little tab there for medical records. You can put in your user ID and password, and that's a great way to actually get all your medical records on your phone. If you get care at 5 different places, you get one timeline with all of those elements in there. Apple doesn't have it. It just gives it to you on the phone. What we realize is not everyone can afford an iPhone, so we're working with Common Health to do this with them for Android as well. So I want to make sure you all get that we have to enable patients with this data. It's not just a cool thing to do, it's federal law at this point. But it's still amazing how many health systems you might go to that aren't even on this list. Not sure what that says about them, but I'm telling you, we're going to share this data with patients, including notes now, right? All those op notes, right? All those surgical notes, all those discharge notes are all available to patients. Imagine what they should or shouldn't be doing with them. All right, so a lot of operational teams have been benefiting from this data, saving millions of dollars. I'm going to give you a couple examples here in a moment, but because we have central tools to improve the quality of care, we can decrease some unnecessary drugs, centralized population health management. I'll go into a couple details here. This slide is deliberately blurred out. These are the top 10 drugs we use on each of the campuses. So for example, up in the gray there is UCSF. And the top left little corner there is a particular drug for breast cancer. Okay, I'm not going to say the name of it, and I'm not going to say, well, I'll tell you the amount. That little square there is about $200 million. These are just the charges from 2022 charges. This entire slide is about $4 billion. So I'm showing you $4 billion on one slide. Now, top 10 drugs, as you'd guess, most of these are biologics, right? No surprise here, they're pretty expensive. But then why aren't they the same biologics? Why does, for example, for anti-TNF alpha, why does UCLA use a lot of this one and UCSF use a lot of that one? Which is the right one to use? And all of a sudden now it's in our interest to do the comparative effectiveness study. We don't need a grant from PCORI to do this. We want to do this. And then we can do something that's super magical. Let's buy them together, right? Something we call leveraging scale for value. Something I think Medicare is just learning how to do. We can put in one purchase order and get a better price because we can count and start to standardize on some of this, right? It's no secret, it's no miracle here. The minute you start to look at this, you start to realize what you can do with the data together. We'll be doing a lot more of these. Another example is my favorite example, IV Tylenol. Not actually Tylenol, that's a brand name, IV acetaminophen. Yeah, everyone knows what acetaminophen is, right? Now, it's a pennies for a pill, but the IV dose, hopefully this company's not here, there's one company that makes it in the United States. IV Tylenol, IV acetaminophen is $50 a dose. You crack the vial, you bought the whole vial, okay? 50, 50, 50, 50, 50. Now there are appropriate uses for IV acetaminophen, right? Maybe it's pre-op or post-op, right? You can't take anything by mouth. Maybe it's a kid, a child, pediatrics. Maybe it's an opioid. You're trying to avoid opioids here, right? But what we realized when we look at our database is, boy, so many patients are getting IV acetaminophen at the same time as other oral pills. Why couldn't they get the acetaminophen by pill? Because it's $50 each one, right? We're not paid any differently for using this drug. Pre-negotiated DRG. This is an absolute waste of money for us, right? All I can do is show you the curve. It's the Hawthorne effect. You start to look at something, it gets better, right? Zoop right down. Of course, working with the chief pharmacy officers who came up with this project, the pharmacists who are making it harder to order this in Epic and elsewhere, this is an example where just this one drug saves us millions because we don't need to use the IV form of this drug, right? We could use the oral form. Expect to see more of this happening at University of California. All right, here's one dashboard for all of our patients now with type 2 diabetes. Just to give you an example how in one dashboard we can manage entire cohorts. There's nearly 50,000 patients on this dashboard, 48,700 or so. This is data as of last month, so we update these things monthly now. You can see most are followed by a primary care doc from us, but some see a specialist and endocrinologist. We have the latest hemoglobin A1C, and we have the A1C changes on the right. It hasn't been increasing or decreasing. Over the holidays, a lot of A1Cs go up. That's the blood test we use to track type 2 diabetes. And all on the bottom, you can see, are they getting optimal diabetes care? What is their eye health, kidney health, foot health? Are we even looking at these? We track all of this for diabetes now, for hypertension. We're working on lipids. So on one dashboard, you have 5 academic medical centers here, right? Nobody else. This is never going to happen in Boston. This is never going to happen in New York City because they compete with each other. And we're far enough apart that we don't have to compete with each other. That's why I love being at the University of California. Now, our cancer centers, for those of you with cancer devices and cancer therapeutics, are all working together. All 5 of our NCI cancer centers have now one big cancer consortia. And here I can just show you 105,000 cancer center patients every year. Our best guess is that's triple to quadruple the #1 in the country, that's MD Anderson. We know we're stronger together when we work together. And even here, we have advanced cancer patients, so they're getting immuno-oncology, then CAR T cells, about 31,000 of them. Where do they live, their age, gender, all of that here. By the way, we also have their cancer genomes because we do so many DNA sequences now in cancers, the same database has all the cancer genomes. I think Roche paid $4 billion for Flatiron and Foundation Medicine to get those two together. We definitely have that kind of database now here too. And we use this a lot in partners looking for new targeted therapeutics with pharma and biotechs. Now, I'm going to just really bring this to the next step here. And now, look, I'm a researcher. I write papers and grants. I still got to write those papers, publish or perish. So I used to get a lot of my inspiration from NIH, but boy, I'm getting a lot of my inspiration now from the FDA. Look at these covers here, right? Look at the covers of these guidances. AI machine learning software as a medical device, real world evidence, digital health innovation action plan. The FDA, I would have been thrilled to see one of these. We got all 3 of these in the past 5 years. Digital health innovation means we can now write a prescription for more than 20 apps. I don't know if you know that. 20 apps now are prescribable. Real world evidence, we'll spend a lot of time talking about in a moment. That's our clinical data. And software and AI as a medical device. AI will definitely end with today. It's just the future here. But one big use of the clinical data we have is assessing the care we deliver, right? Or otherwise known as real world data or real world evidence here. Now, real-world data quickly overcomes and overpowers pivotal study data. I'm not going to go through this detail here, but I'll just give you an example of just what this means for any of you. Humira is a well-known drug from AbbVie, right? Those 4 bullets there are the first 4 studies that they used to get approval from the FDA from Humira. Those are no secrets, they're on their website. The first one, they had 542 treated patients with Humira. The second one, 619 patients in that study, 299, 854. And then what happens after a drug is approved? Boom, we use it. More than 11,000 patients now that we have data on treated with Humira, right? At a certain point, we can walk into AbbVie and say, we might know more about this drug now than you do, because we use it like crazy. Take any drug after it's approved, any device, after it's approved, we use it like crazy. We might know more about these drugs than you do. Now, this really makes sense, and the FDA has embraced this. Many examples now of how clinical data can be used to gain new indications or even approvals for drugs. The best example is Pfizer Ibrance for male breast cancer. Male breast cancer is certainly not a public health menace. It would take forever to get a trial, but the molecule is being used off-label. It's already approved for female breast cancer. Why not use it off-label for male breast cancer? Enough clinical data existed in EHRs that Pfizer was able to gain approval without running a clinical study, right? That has happened now with the SAPIEN 3 artificial heart valve, gaining a novel indication there. We got synthetic control arms. That's not synthetic data, fake data. This is just the control arm could be in one place, the tested arm could be in another place. So much of that happening now. We've started now a Center for Real World Evidence. We partner at UCSF and UC-wide. The people, pharma, biotechs, I think we have 15 pharma, biotech, and device partners now that come to us with questions that we can help answer. And here's our best example in the device world, working in 2021, partnering with AtriCure. This is a cryo nerve block. They were trying to gain an indication for adolescents. Purely using off-label clinical data, they gained that indication from UCSF data, right? So we helped partner with that. This is what we can do with existing data. You might be able to get an approval, might be able to get a new indication here. More importantly, can we study where these things are working and not working? In fact, I think real-world data is just the tip of the iceberg. 21 uses out there that we can at least count, whether it's updating side effects, better patient selection for clinical trials, long-term post-trial outcomes. Just because you ended your trial, we still treat these patients. We know what's happening to them after your trial is done. You might want to know some of that too. And on and on and on. So many uses for that kind of data. What I really want to end with is another big use of clinical data is using it to train computers to learn what we are doing in medicine, artificial intelligence. I don't think it's any surprise to any of you that AI and machine learning are just taking off now. I think we'll talk about ChatGPT in a moment here, but it's certainly a new world for all of us in this area. That's just level set, make sure everyone gets what these terms mean. Artificial intelligence is the broadest term. Computers mimicking aspects of human intelligence. Cars driving by themselves, languages translating by computer. That's AI. Machine learning is one kind of AI where we're using data to train that computer. Now you might ask, you're using data to train a computer, how else would you do it? Well, in the 70s, we didn't have a lot of data, so we used to use experts and rules, right? We'd ask a doctor, right? What do you do if you see this, and what do you do if you see that? That really didn't get very far. It's much better to see what a doctor does, for example, in their EHR data, than ask them what they're doing, okay? And so that's why the data revolution, we have so much data, is taken off. And deep learning is one kind of machine learning where the models that we're building crudely resemble a human brain with one thing pointing to another, one model pointing to another model, pointing to another model, and you get the ability to learn nonlinear things like images and voice. And you see many examples of that out there in terms of turning that in reverse and generating pictures and generating text. Now, AI, machine learning, sounds scary. There is no wizard behind the curtain. You can literally buy dummies books on all of these, $17 each. All these are software tools we download to put in our software. And many of them are free now, right? You don't even have to pay money for these tools. A lot of them are developed by Google or Facebook or even Berkeley, and a lot of tools and communities out there. AI in medicine goes way back to the 70s. One of the first examples was helping docs pick the right antibiotic, right? You know, sometimes in hospitals they have resistance, bugs that are resistant to particular antibiotics. They have these antimicrobograms that they give out to residents and house staff. Well, can you put that in a computer? Well, in 1973, it certainly showed that you could. But look on the right there, literally from the New England Journal of Medicine, Medicine and the Computer, the Promise and Problems of Change. We could have that article today because we're still stuck with this challenge of what to do with AI in medicine here. Why is AI back? We have incredible hardware from the video gamers, companies like NVIDIA. Yes, they make video game boards, but those same boards can be used for deep learning. In fact, we buy so many of them, sometimes it's hard for gamers to buy them. We have great software libraries that are free and great communities. Many high school kids know how to program with this stuff now. It's unbelievable. And in medicine, we have two amazing big data sets to work with. We've got the whole molecular world, which has taken off. We got the EHR world, which has taken off. And we still have these hard, unsolved questions to help answer. Now, this is not just theoretical, okay? Since the FDA put out their guidance, 500 AI and machine learning algorithms have been approved. The master list is on the link there. And by the way, I'm tweeting all of this stuff out, so you can find this on my Twitter, so you don't have to write all this stuff down. 500, it's updated weekly. 150 of them just in radiology. And the American College of Radiology runs their own list. And so this is happening every single week. It turns out a lot of these folks can work from home during COVID, so this took off during COVID. You don't have to go to a lab to do this. This is not going to stop. This is just going to continue to grow. 500 plus. Most of these by small companies, some by big companies. Many of the companies that you know of are already filing for these. Now, we're not too behind at UCSF. I think the fun ones, we've been partnering with a lot of different companies. Well, I'll give you an example of how this works. So at UCSF, we had so many pictures from chest x-rays that we figured, you know, you could partner with a company like GE that makes an x-ray device, right? And so if you're in the intensive care unit, for example, your patient's not going to go down to radiology, right? They have a breathing tube in. They might be on a ventilator. So you bring the x-ray to them, right? The portable chest x-ray. Well, the GE portable chest x-ray unit now that you bring, that you buy, when it takes a picture, it automatically will detect two things for you at the bedside. Where is that breathing tube, the ET tube? You kind of want it up, you don't want it in one of the lungs or the other. And is there a pneumothorax, so a little bit of a collapsed lung? Both of those now are auto-detected by machine learning trained with UCSF images, right? So you went from images that are already existing. Of course, you do have to do this safely, responsibly, taking into account what patients want, what they've consented to, all the way down to now the device has the algorithms built in. That's just one of many of these kind of examples. All right, I'm going to skip through a couple here to show you how this is going to work here in the future. Because all of you make devices, some of you make drugs, some of you make drugs on devices, but all of these go together in a trajectory, like how do we take care of patients? Here's my favorite example, looking at a complicated problem called type 2 diabetes. Perhaps you've heard of diabetes, of course. This is what the American Diabetes Association says a doctor like me, an endocrinologist, should do for a patient with diabetes. Well, at the top there it says, get them to eat healthier, lose weight, exercise. When that fails, there's a big metformin at the top, right? And then when that fails, you got these 6 boxes in the middle. Choose one of these others to add to the metformin. And then when that fails, add another category. And when everything fails, go down to metformin and insulin at the bottom, right? You see that, right? So I was curious to wonder, where exactly do patients go and which of those boxes do we choose? Because in the middle there, some of those boxes cost 200 times more than other boxes. But which ones do our patients go in? And so that's a question for us. So the analogy of this, right? We have a guideline. It's great we have a guideline. Look, it's pastel colors. It's like made for California, right? But there are a lot of diseases where we don't even have a nice diagram like that. You know that, right? But I think of this, the analogy I like to use is it's a pachinko machine. In Japan, they have these really odd pinball machines that are vertical. And the ball starts at the top and it kind of drops down. I think people place bets on these things. And I think patients are like that too. Which box do they go to next, right? And so that's what we wanted to ask at UCSF. And so here, we could generate these kinds of figures. We used to call these diabetes donuts, and then we realized donuts are not so good for diabetes. We call these lifesaver plots now, okay? Here are 26,822 patients we started on a drug for type 2 diabetes, okay? And the yellow means metformin. That's great. A third of our patients start on metformin. That's what it said to do. A quarter of them at the bottom start on insulin. Boy, okay, that's interesting. Maybe they're sicker than they're supposed to be. And all the other colors are other drugs, other combinations of drugs. And the gray at the top means there's so many slices there, I can't even show you them all, right? And so what happens in medicine? We take care of this patient, we say, okay, try this drug, come back in 90 days, let's see how you're doing, and that's the next ring. The next ring is the next thing we did to this patient. Yellow to yellow means they're still on metformin, but we changed the dose. Yellow by itself means they're happy on that dose, we've never changed the dose. Any other color change means we added a drug, subtracted a drug, changed a drug. Okay, go home, come back in 90 days, let's see how you're doing. That's the third ring. Okay, now what? Well, go home, come back in 90 days, let's see how you're doing, and that's the fourth ring. And then we realize we have 1,500 different ways to start a patient on type 2 diabetes meds at UCSF. 1,500 slots there, okay? Probably too many. Can we get it down to 1,000, maybe 100, maybe 10, right? We have docs who are like, well, I was trained, hit them with everything and then peel it back. Where does it say that in American Diabetes Association, right? Where exactly where's that in the diagram, right? That's neat. And we hit one button and boom, we have now the entire University of California on one figure, 159,000 type 2 diabetes patients, but we have more than 5,000 ways to do this at the University of California, probably too many. We got to get down to one UC way to do this. And that to me is going to be the future here, right? I'm not saying we're going to get rid of evidence-based medicine, but a lot of evidence-based medicine has been expert-driven medicine, right? The experts convene, the experts look at the trials. I think the future of evidence-based medicine is data-driven medicine here, right? Now, why am I saying all this? Because think about how we treat patients, right? Let's try this. Let's see what the disease does. Let's try this. Let's write orders on morning rounds. Let's see how the patient's doing. Let's write some more orders. Medicine is practiced synchronously. We write orders, we wait to see what happens, we write more orders. The same way how games like chess, checkers, and Go are played. And boy, computers are really great at that. And it's only a matter of time before computers can look at all the EHR data and figure out this worked, this doesn't work. Now, in fact, we can get so good now, we can predict if we start this med, that's a prediction, we can guess where the hemoglobin A1C is going to be in 90 days. Right? That's the observed on the vertical there, right? We're pretty good now thinking if we start this drug on this patient, that's where the A1C is going to go in 90 days because we just have so much data. In fact, you don't even need deep learning to figure all this out. Here's a simple decision tree learned from the data. Remember the yellow, right? The patients who did well with metformin and the folks who had to change? Can we just predict who does well with metformin? And on the right there, you see the red. If your hemoglobin A1C was ever more than 8.8 or your fasting blood sugar was ever more than 206, you're in the red square. And that means we know the metformin is not going to work. I know what the American Diabetes Association says, but we've treated over 100,000 patients like this. It's not going to work. Whatever the next move you're going to make it now to get this patient under better therapy sooner. And that's what I mean by data-driven medicine to help figure all that out. Doctor needs to make a choice. Let's make a little prediction of which one's going to work. Doctor makes the right choice, personalized for each patient here. We can already start to do this in other diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. We can do this across hospital systems. In fact, I think the future is not just a learning healthcare system where we learn with our data. I think the computer is going to teach us automatically how to improve our care. Because I think that why are we waiting for experts to go look at something? I think the computer is going to constantly look at it and say, by the way, I've now seen 10 patients with kidney transplants who are not doing so well on this drug. Maybe you should try this other thing as well. If that seems so far-fetched, it's really not. Here are just 3 examples we just curated just in the last week or two with ChatGPT. Now, one of the things we have all of our notes de-identified so we can legally put them into ChatGPT. Here's a complicated note which you can barely read from a cancer patient at UCSF, a progress note. And we just simply ask at the bottom, give me all the cancer biomarkers. Well, ChatGPT says, well, here, ER, estrogen receptor, that's not in the note, but it's explaining it to us. PR, progesterone receptor, HER2, right? Off-the-shelf ChatGPT knows what a cancer biomarker is and explains it to you. But at the bottom, there's MP, mammaprint. Our own oncologist missed that the MP in this context is another biomarker. Happens to be a private company and makes a product called mammaprint. It's tiny to MP high risk. But off-the-shelf ChatGPT got it, our own oncologists didn't. ChatGPT can do drug discovery. Given a currently available drug, find compounds with similar properties, modify them to make sure they're not patented, put in the purchase orders, synthesize them for me. Jordy now says, I'm testing all of my diligence questions on every company that's pitching to me, looking at trial design, clinical hypotheses, endpoints, target validation. The days of the $1,000 an hour KOLs is over, he says. ChatGPT can write the IND itself, okay? Given enough publicly available data, rewrite this section, and literally it's writing an IND off the shelf. How much do we pay consultants for that, I wonder, right? But it's a complicated environment with biases and a lack of transparency, biases in terms of the data we're using, biases in the way the algorithms are being built. HHS is saying, thou shall not discriminate by algorithms. Our own Attorney General is asking us, how do we curate and steward these algorithms? FDA says sepsis algorithms shall be regulated further. Epic itself says, we're getting rid of our Epic algorithm now. Then all of a sudden we have an AI Bill of Rights. Every screenshot I'm showing you here is just 6 months old or newer at this point. It's that active of a field. And I think it's an amazing time. What else can we do with clinical data? We're going to empower patients. We're going to empower communities. We're going to empower all sorts of researchers, entrepreneurs. I'm going to end with this. What am I planning to do with this data? I'm trying to build maps of death and disease in California. Yes, that sounds morbid, but I want to know how our patients are going to die. And so here you see an example of a map learned from the data. On the top left, we see patients showing up with alcoholism. Each arrow is a year. A year later, they have liver disease, or they go to the left, they go to liver abscess. And the squares mean they died of those diseases. You can't die of alcoholism that easily in our system, but you die of the complications. Here's a harder one. Patients showing up on the left with heart attacks. Heart attacks, you die right away, or a year later, you're in heart failure. And in heart failure, heart as a pump is too weak to pump that blood that starts to build up in the lung. You got lung disease in orange. And on the right there is septicemia. Now that was a surprise to me because, of course, I trained as a pediatrician. I didn't take care of a bunch of patients with heart attacks, but I always thought it was the heart that killed you in the end. In fact, it's the infection that kills you in the end, because if you don't take the northern route on the map, you can knock out your kidney and take the southern route on the map. And that's the point of having maps, to figure out what's going next. But I don't want to just build maps. I want to show where all of our patients are on the map. This is a real prototype with real Californians moving. This is how, as they get older, the colors get brighter, they move from disease to disease to disease to death. A whole bunch of them are going to get sepsis in a moment. They're in purple, and they're going to die. There they go. It's okay, you can chuckle. We can be morbid here. And now the future is predicting what's going to happen next 90 days, what's going to happen in the next year, and what are we going to do about it? And that, to me, is going to be the new definition of an accountable care organization, one that knows how to account for the care of all 9 million of its patients. That's what I'm really proud of building with a lot of friends and colleagues in the University of California. I have to thank a lot of collaborators, a lot of folks who make the database happen, a lot of funding from a lot of organizations. I'd love to thank my family for letting me go all over the place to give talks like this. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that talk. I feel like you blew my mind right off the bat. I'm from Texas, and I see a lot of parallels with the University of Texas health system. And I'm wondering, do you work with other state health systems to do similar work?
Great question. In fact, I believe the only other state that can pull this off is Texas, okay? We have been trying to help them for years now, at least 8 years. I think they're a little bit behind where we are. There is definitely an effort in Austin, UT Austin, so their office of their president, to make things happen. I really believe UT can do this. The harder issue in Texas, though, is they're not all at the same peer level, meaning they don't all believe they're all at the same peer level, right? I'm going to show Riverside, even though they're a baby medical school, but they're one of ours, right? Like MD Anderson and UTMB are going to be they don't perceive themselves necessarily at the same level, let's say, right? So I think you have to respect each other first, but we're trying to help them technically to make that happen. Go ahead. I totally know Zane, and Zane's totally there. I mean, we're exchanging emails constantly. I think that's the struggle he has there for sure.
Yeah, I'm Jack Mormon from the US-Japan Healthcare Society. A lot of hospitals use UpToDate.com. Mayo Clinic has its own. How do these compare or compete with the kind of work you're doing?
Look, I think there's going to be a new role for partnerships here, right? Look, this is Partnering for Progress, at least on my side. I think So I think we got to get so look, it's a complicated healthcare system, right? We are all competitors in some ways. And for some reason, we love a competitive healthcare system in the United States. I'm not saying it's right or whatever. So, but what it means though is neighbors are going to have a hard time sharing data with each other. I know principal investigators share data with other principal investigators, PIs, to do cohort studies and things. But in general, competing health systems are not going to bulk data share with each other, right? Because we put billboards next to Stanford, they put billboards next to us. I love them still, right? But that's how it is, billions in revenue. What I do think is going to happen is we're going to have a little bit of a hopscotch, right? I might not share with a neighbor, but I might share with the neighbor's neighbor, right? Where we're not competing. And essentially that's what we have at University of California, right? We're far enough apart that we can actually share because we don't compete. Now, there's actually one avenue in Orange County where UCLA and UC Irvine abut, okay? And maybe there's some skirmish there, I don't know. But in general, we're big enough that we don't have to compete with each other. We can see the business value of working together. So I think it's a business model, right? It's not a technical problem. I'm going to be the IT person who stands up here and says, this is not a technologically hard problem. It's about the business model to want to work with someone else or many others and see those advantages enough to put some money in to actually make this happen. And yeah, Mayo's working with Duke, Mayo's working with many folks, Mayo's working with Mayo. Mayo has a lot of different sites. So there are a lot of these kind of hopscotches happening now, little by little. Truveta is another big one, which is a data story with about 20 different health systems, Providence and many others. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the energy you bring to this. When you look down the road 10, 20, 50 years, depending on how long it takes to get to that standardization, how do you think that will change the practice of medicine in terms of new treatments? So for example, ICU right now, there's not many randomized clinical trials from ethical considerations, but we can compare this hospital does it this way, this hospital does it that way, and you kind of get to, well, here's the best practice. What does that look like then when every system has, this is the UC way of doing it? Does that actually at some point lead to now less opportunities for new insights from that data?
That's a great question. I think we have a long way to go before any of us can tell a doctor what to do, okay? And I'm also guilty of making everything seem easy on stage here, right? Of course, no one has to listen to me. I have 1,000 dashed lines, right, on my org chart here, right? So, but I think it's about working with teams that want to start to standardize to improve the, reduce the cost of care, right? We started this morning talking about a depressing environment, right? 45% of health systems are now in the red this coming year. So no one's going to argue about reducing the cost of care, right? So you pick some kind of business planks that are unassailable in some ways, get buy-in and go that way. Now, but in general, to answer your question, yes, I do believe in the future, physicians are going to have fewer choices, not more choices, because a lot more will be prescribed to them. But you could also argue it's kind of already like that from payers. And what I'm going to say is let's use our clinical data to drive that, not just some payer guidance and prior auth, right? Which you could argue kind of is made up, right? Let's use our own data to figure out what's working and not working. Now, let me be super provocative in the last minute here, right? I'm just asking simple, stupid questions. You all do trials for your drugs and devices. You all get approval. I just want to make sure my patients benefit the same way yours did in the trials. Because you know what? If they're not benefiting, maybe we shouldn't pay as much for this device or drug anymore, right? How about we think about it that way? I kind of want you to make sure every one of my patients is benefiting now the same way they did in your trial. That's all I can ask. Look, if you got 60% of the trial, I want to see 60% of my patients. But why is it we're not even looking at this right now, right? I'm going to argue it's not just my responsibility, it should be my duty to study every damn thing we do in our health system, make sure every one of my patients benefits from it, right? That's a simple, stupid question I should be asking more. Every health system should. I don't need a PCORI grant. I should want to do this, right? That's the future here. If the data's there, we spent billions collecting this data. About time we use it. We have time for another one, or should we just end on that? I don't want to be depressing. There's one more hand here. Let's quick one. Just say it, and I'll repeat it. Oh, please. Yeah. So amazing. So, a question about outside the United States. So, look, I think the world is going to watch what we're doing here. In some weird way, we thought we were behind with electronic health records, and all of a sudden we're ahead because we have federal standards now, right? again, we're all kicking and screaming to enter this world. China now is starting to get to some standards. Japan has those. GDPR makes things harder. We've had HIPAA for 25 years now, so we kind of know what the rules are. That's a benefit for us. India is trying to get some standardization of EHRs. I think they have to cross that step that we crossed 10, 15 years ago in terms of meaningful use of EHRs, but it can happen, right? It can happen. So I think the future is all of us showing what we can do with data and really just teaching the world this is the right interest, this is the right direction to go in. We've spent a lot of resources doing all of this, collecting this data. Let's make sure it's all working for all of us here, right? Across the world, across the state, across the county, and certainly across the United States. All right, I think I should probably end here. Thank you very much.